Okay, guys. Thanks for joining. I'm going to turn it over to Sophia to get us started. You guys saw her name as our new communications outreach person, and then we're just going to get with the team. If at any point somebody needs to tell me, hey, your screen doesn't show what you think it shows, please tell me. Thanks, Sophia.
Yeah. Howdy, everyone. Welcome to our first member meeting. We're so excited to see your smiling, maybe sleepy faces. I know it's the day after Halloween and it is a Friday. Feels like a Friday. But we're happy you're here. We ask that you please leave your cameras on so we could put faces to names. So we're being courteous to Jessica and it feels like she's presenting to people and not just blank screens. And if you could just keep those on and keep your microphone on mute, we would very much appreciate that. We have a meeting agenda here that we'll put in the chat as well, so you could reference back to it. If we're using chat a lot, I'll make sure to send it again so it doesn't get lost. We're going to do a group connection activity, go over calendar updates, some service reminders, and then Hannah will talk about our Talk Saves Lives training that she's going to be doing with you guys. It's optional, but it'll be a great training and she'll tell you more info later. And then we'll hear from Jessica for her workshop about nonprofits in the Texas Panhandle, and then ask you to do a quick end of meeting survey before you leave the Zoom call. And that'll wrap up our meeting. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring that and trying to answer them as we go along. And I think Laura will take it from here.
So, wanted to pull out your calendars, be thinking about these things. Want to make sure you kind of had some upcoming dates in mind. We've got those WT class assignments out there. I know some of you may still have trouble getting into WT class. If so, reach out to Hannah, reach out to IT if you already know, hey, the problem's really an IT problem, but start with Hannah if you need to. But November 15th will be the due date for quizzes that are in WT class that have to do with your training. If you're a returning member, the expectation is the disaster relief training, and that's all. If you're a new member, there's 3 trainings. There's AmeriCorps 101, Program 101, Disaster Relief. So please look into those. Let us know if you have questions. November 21st, and you're about to hear more about this, but we'll have a training that is optional, but it's real interesting. Hannah will talk about it. It's Talk Saves Lives. On November 22nd, we're about to send you an information about working in pairs to create your elevator speech. And that's something we talk about a lot with AmeriCorps, but the idea is that you're able to describe your service. You meet somebody on the street and they say, what are you doing now? And you're able to talk about service and what AmeriCorps is and your beneficiaries and how you're impacting the Panhandle. So we've got some really clear, kind of step-by-step, here's what you need to know to do that, and here's who you're working with, and here's when y'all need to meet or set up your times. But just want you to know that's a date coming up that work will be due by the 22nd. We'll have another one of these meetings on December 6th. So go ahead and mark that on your calendar, roughly a month from now. And then we have a new service day. Hey, once more at another Chance House. It'll be optional, but keep it in mind in case you want to catch some hours or be part of that. So that'll be December 7th. I wanted to go over some of you are brand new, some of you are not, but I want to just remind us all of some of these guidelines we're using. So WT class is where we'll do some training and assignments. If you're not in yet, please be sure and take steps that you have access to that. We do have a bit of an IT hang up, so we'll work with you if it's not gelling yet. Make sure you're meeting with your supervisor. If you have not yet met with your supervisor, talk to them about getting a meeting. If you, for some reason, something just isn't working and you're not meeting with them, let me know. But that's part of their expectations, part of how the whole relationship works. So get those meetings, we want those meetings to be scheduled and regular. Timesheets due yesterday. Hope they're all in. I haven't double checked. I know members returning in brand new have run into something that I know there's that step to return your progress report before your timesheet is completed. I think that's been what has hung up some people. So make sure those 2 steps happen. Your progress report's done, then you go back to your timesheet and submit it. I've seen times where there's timesheets that are ready and they're sitting there, but they're not submitted. So make sure you're getting them that final step to submit them. Also, everyone has a benchmark calendar. As a reminder, that's kind of the hours you need to be completing each timesheet period. refer to that and kind of check in to see if you're on track. And you can find it in your position description. There's one member today that does not have a position description yet because I need to load it up. And he's brand new, who started 2 weeks ago. Everybody else, your position description should be, you still need to sign it. So you can kind of go look for that and let me know if you can't find it. Finally, we've laid out goals for the organization and for you that are part of your service. So for instance, we've identified, hey, we're going to be counting learners in each class. So your service should line up to what that goal is. I've got a few more of those meetings to go. We're still kind of laying it out, but your supervisors are working to identify those goals. That can be something you're talking about with them. And just make sure that you kind of understand what the goals are that you're working towards to complete in your service to support your site. And we'll talk more about data, collecting data, why data is important, why it matters to us as a grant, and all those different things. This last one, I know everybody loves it. Please check your WT staff email every day. That is how we communicate to you. You won't get something from us every day, but I need you to check it to make sure if you've got something or not from us. I know sometimes it feels like, oh, this is a surprise thing. I just heard about it. I guarantee there's usually probably an email before that. Right till now, we've been trying to send them both to personal emails or student emails and your staff email. But it's time that we need to kind of shift and streamline onto WT staff emails where we'll communicate. Please check it. If you don't have that email yet, let us know. Call it. Look back in your personal emails to see if you've had a request to set up your staff email, and call IT. But if something's happening and you don't have it, let us know and we'll keep working with you on that. All right. Any questions? Okay. We're moving on. Hannah, go ahead.
All right, so this is just going to be super brief. I am going to be doing a Talk Saves Lives presentation. I always have to say that slowly because I'll trip over it sometimes, but this is specifically around suicide prevention. It is designed for people who have struggled with mental health issues, who have not, who maybe have a loved one, or maybe you work in a field where you interact with people a lot who struggle. And so this is designed for everybody. It's provided by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So deep down, I'm a researcher. It's evidence-based, right? So everything I'm going to bring to you that day is going to be based on real numbers within the US. So it's on the 21st of November. So here in just about 3 weeks, it'll be between 2 and 4 p.m. More than likely, it'll go a little short. Some of this just depends on discussion at the JBK in the White Room. And we will provide food as well. So free food, y'all. I mean, that normally gets me just about anywhere. But there's going to be resources, good conversations. If you have any questions, concerns, or anything like that, feel free to reach out to me in the meantime.
All right. Whew. Made it through our program stuff right on time. Guys, what we want to move into now is we're going to hear from Jessica Tudyk about nonprofits in the Texas Panhandle. She is a site supervisor at one of our sites and really well acquainted with our program. She's also a senior program officer at the Mary E. Bivens Foundation in Amarillo. She earned her Bachelor's of Science and Master of Science degrees in education from Baylor University and a Master of Nonprofit Leadership and Management from Arizona State University. She's a Master Certified Health Education Specialist, which we rely on because we're so glad she's coming in with what she knows. And she's an experienced grant seeker, has spent over 10 years creating and managing grant-making programs. And she spent almost 10 years managing scholarship programs and initiatives to include an effort to address hunger and food insecurity among older adults living in the Texas Panhandle, which is where we intersect with her a lot. Jessica, take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you, Laura. Okay, first thing I'm going to do, I can't
I'll
share
stop.
my screen. Yep. But I am going to go ahead and stick in the chat a link to a quiz. It's a 4-question quiz. It says the word quiz. Don't panic. Any of you who like have anxiety about tests. There will be no grade, there will be no red X's, but go ahead and click on that link and work on filling out those 4 questions real quick while I share my screen.
Also, if you have any questions for Jessica while she's presenting, feel free. She said it's okay to interrupt her. However, if you are anxious about that, you could send it in the chat and I'll bring them up to her either when she has a break in speaking or at the end.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sophia. I appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes to answer those questions. Oh, good. We're starting to get responses. That means I set it up correctly. Yay.
When I click on the link, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah, me neither.
Oh, that's intriguing.
It did work for me. So
Who is it that said it wasn't working?
Brian and was it Dawn Doctor?
Dawn, Brian,
Dawn.
yes, and Brian.
Okay, Dawn, I tried to send it to you again. See if that works. Brian, I tried to send it to you again. Let's
Got
see if
it.
that
It's
works.
working.
I had to right click to get mine to open.
Oh, you had to right click to get yours to open, Janae?
Yep.
And Brian, be sure and look at it in the chat, not on the screen. See if that works for you there.
Oh, in
Fair.
the chat. Um,
Laura, about how many people do we have on the call that are members? So excluding you, AmeriCorps folks, and me.
Um,
Do we know that number-ish?
we do about 20.
Okay, we're up to about 12, so we're getting there.
We're getting there.
Getting there. I won't wait till we
Maybe
get them
even up
all.
to 22. I'm looking at our total and who's on. Yep.
Okay, well, so far we have about half that are saying they just know a little bit about nonprofits. About a quarter know a decent amount, and about 25% know a lot. No experts yet?
I still can't get into, it won't do anything when I
Brian,
get in there.
have you tried right clicking the link and then clicking the word
Yeah,
link and that won't work?
it doesn't do anything. Right or, um, nope, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah, Brian, I'm sorry we're having technical issues. I'm not quite sure how to troubleshoot that.
Well, I'm a dummy on this stuff, so,
It's okay. Again, there's no grade, so it's all
I
right.
would
that it's
yeah.
through. Yeah, so we're up to about 20, so I'll kind of just share. It does look like about half just know a little bit about nonprofits, about quarter know a decent amount, and about quarter know a lot, so that's good. Some of the definitions that people say in their own words what a nonprofit is. An organization that serves the community and uses funds to do so rather than for monetary profit. Gold star to whoever wrote that one. Oh, come on, don't refresh. An organization set up to help people, a program that puts the needs of the community ahead of personal gain, charity to help less fortunate, an organization that operates in services not intended for profit, so not a business, which will be interesting. We'll talk more about that later. Organization helps the community, expects nothing in return. Just some of the examples. So it looks like we're pretty much on par. And a lot of people do understand what a nonprofit is just based on what your own words are for what a nonprofit organization it is. Oh, I love it. Okay, I'm looking at some of the questions now. This is for me in real time, figuring it out. Tax status, how to raise more money, how to function efficiently. How can nonprofits help me? Not quite sure, just getting started. Where do you get grants? Where do you find donors? How do you start nonprofits? Oh, cross-organizational relationships. Yeah. Cross-sector partnerships and collaboration. That's a good one. I'm not sure we'll be able to dive deep into that, but that is a good conversation to be had. Yeah. Oh, how do we tell if a nonprofit is a good one or a legit one? Those are all great, great questions. I think we'll talk about quite a few of them today, and hopefully I'll be able to answer some of the ones I wasn't expecting to cover. More how nonprofits operate, more knowledge, practical advice, any information. It's okay, Brianna. I won't hold it against you that you have to leave early. I won't take it personal. More knowledge, better understanding. Okay, fantastic. Good. I think we're all in the right place. None of that struck me as surprising, and none of that was off the wall. So we are going to go well. As I said, my name is Jessica Tudyk, and I am the Senior Program Officer here at the Mary E. Bivens Foundation. And I have been in this role here for just over 6 years. I was actually at the Amarillo Area Foundation for 3 years before that. But I've spent my entire career in the Texas Panhandle working in nonprofits. While I'm not an expert by any means, I do think I have a lot of information that could be useful that I am happy to share. And like Sophia said, like this is not very formal presentation. If we were in person, it might be a little bit easier. But if you do have a question, feel free to interrupt me. I probably won't see the chat because I'll probably be busy talking. But if you want to unmute and say, "Hey, Jessica, got a quick question," feel free to do that. Or like Sophia said, she'll monitor hopefully that chat and Q&A and be able to interrupt for you. So we were going to start with introductions, but we've already, I think, done that and covered the whole gamut. So we're not going to do that. But thank you for filling out the quiz, because I do think that helped me shape some of exactly what you hope to get out of today. Okay, so unfortunately, we're just going to roll right back into another quiz because this one is more of a pre-test. So Brian, sorry about this. Maybe this one will work better for you. Link to this.
I'm doing something wrong. I can see the link at the bottom, but it's in a light blue and I don't.
So is everyone seeing the link to quiz 2 in the chat now? This one's only about 10 questions and it should go pretty quick. The first one had a lot of text entry on your part. This is just a lot of either selections or true, false.
We're not seeing the link in the
Yeah,
chat,
it's not
Jessica.
there.
Oh, okay. Hold on just a second. It'll help if I do it this way, huh?
Announce in the chat.
That's what happens when you have one person doing all the things at one time. And I have to tell you, Laura, especially, you'll appreciate this, but I plan to like intersperse a couple quizzes throughout my conversation and my talk. And then as I was building it together, I realized I needed you guys to do this all at the very beginning, not halfway in the middle when I'd already covered most of it. So this quiz should go pretty quickly though. Give y'all a couple minutes to finish that quiz. Dawn, did it work for you this time?
Well, I'm gonna have to figure out it. I mean, I see, I guess it's the chat room on the side. And I see everybody's names and your name, but I don't see the link in there.
You might be looking at participants, Brian. Can you exit out of that? Like
Exit out of what?
Exit out of the sidebar that shows the people's names. And then at the
Yeah.
bottom of your screen, do you see like an icon that says chat?
Yes.
Can you click that and see if you could see Jessica's most recent message?
Direct message. Okay. And it just comes up with a whole bunch of names on it.
Do you see text underneath
Oh, I
everybody's
see it
names?
now. Okay. That's it?
Yeah, the HT.
Okay, I got it. I got it.
Yay!
There we go.
Teamwork.
I love it. It is hard to provide technical assistance virtually when you don't see what somebody else is seeing.
Well, you're gonna have to with me.
You're doing it.
You are doing it. Okay, how are we feeling about the quiz? I'm starting to see answers. Oh, interesting. This is good. This is good. Laura, we're right on track with what we're gonna, or at least I hope I'm right on track. I will say that the title that Laura put is a little misleading because I'm not just gonna focus on Texas Panhandle, but I am gonna talk about nonprofits and I am gonna go through some details about what their function and structure is. And oh, this is good information. Laura, I'll be sure and share some of this with you. I think we're gonna learn a lot today. Okay, I'm gonna start. If you're still working on the quiz, second quiz, keep going, finish it up. But I do have quite a few answers in here, and so I do think we're gonna learn quite a bit today, just based on your answers. And again, thankfully, nothing punitive about the quiz. There's no grade. In fact, I can't even see who answered what because it's all anonymous. But this is really, really good information. In terms of who kind of has a grasp on what that nonprofit world looks like right now. And some of those questions are pretty tricky, I would say. Some of them look to be a little easier than others, but I think a lot of us are going to learn some things. Okay, so thank y'all so much for indulging me and filling out that quiz. I think that is going to be useful information as we move forward. And if we get to a certain point and you think I should have answered one of those questions that maybe you weren't sure, or maybe you got wrong, jump in and go, Jessica, there was that question on the quiz and you haven't answered it, but I feel like right here's where you should be telling us what that answer is. So does that sound like a good plan? Ooh, good information. Okay. All right. Okay, so we are going to start to try to answer the question, what is a nonprofit? And I think this is probably the spot where a lot of you do have a really good grasp, at least philosophically, about what a nonprofit is based on your answers on that first quiz. I think you really understand the purpose maybe of a nonprofit. So let's talk a little bit about that and see if there's anything that we can kind of fill in blanks. I will say I got a pretty philosophical answer about what a nonprofit organization is from the Council of Nonprofits. So I am going to read this real quick because it's kind of lengthy and I broke the rules of PowerPoint presentations everywhere. But charitable nonprofits embody the best of America, and I would say the world, because they're not just restricted to the United States. They provide a way for people to work together for the common good, transforming shared beliefs and hopes into action. They give shape to our boldest dreams, our highest ideals, and our noblest causes. America's 1.5 million charitable nonprofits, so there's answer number one, right? There's 1.5 million nonprofits in the United States. Feed, heal, shelter, educate, inspire, enlighten, and nurture people of every age, gender, race, and socioeconomic status, from coast to coast, border to border, and beyond. They foster civic engagement and leadership, drive economic growth, and strengthen the fabric of our communities every single day. Is anybody surprised by how many nonprofits there are in the United States? I know some of you were, because you didn't answer well. You know, you answered, you underestimated on the quiz. So there should be some people surprised by how many, right?
Yeah, I thought there'd be more.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting that if you've been inundated in the nonprofit world, sometimes you think, oh, there's a ton of nonprofits. And you're, oh, not quite as many as I thought there might be. So very interesting there. And of course, that's just United States. That's not worldwide. There's a lot more nonprofits worldwide, but we didn't go that direction on this. Okay, click on the right screen and that would help. So another thing I just wanted to talk about for a second is vocabulary, because not everybody uses the term nonprofit. And I will say here a little bit, we'll talk about how people say the word nonprofit and expect someone else to understand what they're talking about, and they may be talking about 2 or 3 totally different things. And so nonprofits, it's also called the social sector. Has anybody heard the social sector? The voluntary sector, anybody heard that term? Maybe the third sector, that one's a little bit less used, but the third sector, if you're in economics. NGOs, anybody heard the term NGO? Or non-governmental organization? A lot of the organizations that work internationally and in other countries use the term NGO, or non-governmental organization. Nonprofit organization, nonprofit, not-for-profit, like All those words kind of mean the same thing, kind of have different nuances, but they're all used synonymously. Anybody else have any other words they've heard for nonprofits or the nonprofit sector that aren't on this screen right now?
Ministry.
Okay, that's fair. I could understand ministry. A lot of nonprofits actually start in a church as a program of the church and then expand out and become their own nonprofit.
Unknown caller.
Do what? I
Go
think I missed. Anyway, okay, I'll keep going. But that is where the term nonprofit sector comes from. There are three sectors. The private sector, which is like the businesses that you typically are aware of, the Walmarts, the Targets, the McDonald's, the Wendy's, right? That are operating a business, or the business sector. The public sector, otherwise known as the government sector, right? A lot of your cities, counties, etc. And then we have that third sector, the voluntary sector, which is where nonprofits fit under that kind of umbrella. And so I think there is a myth that there aren't a lot of people working in nonprofit, right? They think, oh, there's few but mighty, right? Like there's just a handful of us working in the nonprofits. And actually 1/10 of the jobs overall is in nonprofits. And that's not something to scoff at. That's quite a few people who work in the nonprofit sector. And then I just had to add this in because I found on the Bureau of Labor Statistics that actually nonprofit workers are the most educated. They have the highest levels of education. So we are the smartest is how I'm going to choose to perceive that and move forward.
For the least amount of money.
Was that a question or just a comment?
I said for the least amount of money.
That's right, for the least amount of money, Matt. That's right. That's right. A lot of times. But we're going to leave that out. We're just going to go with we're the smartest working people. So there's some information there. And at some point in time, I thought, I put all my resources here that if someone wanted to learn more, understand more, I can connect you. And there's some resources on those slides. So if anyone's wanting some of that information, feel free to reach out to me and we'll go for that. But a lot of people do work in the nonprofit sector. And so again, the term nonprofit means different things to many different people. The one common condition, which was our gold star answer earlier on that quiz, is not paying out profits. And so when you look at the private sector, you look at business, the way that operates is they make their money, and at the end of the year, what do? They take that money and they distribute it to all their shareholders as profit, right? Or the owner takes their cut of what was earned, right? They get their profit. And so the whole point of the business or the private sector is profit, it's money making. And in a nonprofit, the only common thing across all nonprofits is that no part of the organization's net earnings, so that means at the end of the year, any profit they make, can inure to the benefit of any private shareholder or individual owner. So you can't, as a nonprofit, take the money that you've earned at the end of the year and distribute it to individuals. It cannot benefit any stakeholder. It cannot benefit any individual in the sense of profits being paid out. Does that make sense? And so hence the term nonprofit, right? The goal is not making a profit. Now, the myth, of course, that a lot of people believe is that, well, then nonprofits can't make a profit, right? Some of y'all answered that in the quiz, that nonprofits can't make a profit, right? Wrong. If a nonprofit isn't at least breaking even, they can't meet their mission, right? They can't do the work that they're doing. And so a nonprofit can actually make a profit, but what they do with that profit, instead of distributing it to stakeholders, is they reinvest it in their mission, right? So I know Discovery Center, we probably got a couple people on here, they'll make example right now. So the Discovery Center, at the end of the year, hopefully they have a profit, but that profit is just reinvested in the mission, right? Over and over and over again. So I do think that is a common myth that nonprofit can't make profit. They can. I would argue they should. They don't have to make a ton of money, but whatever extra money they do make in a year just goes back into their mission. Is that fair? So that is the only common part of a nonprofit. So Laura, we could stop the whole thing here and we could quit talking because that is the only thing that makes it a nonprofit. But we won't. There's some other things that we'll cover. So there's a lot on this screen, and I recognize that, but we're going to go through it pretty slowly. I really wanted to dig into the differences between nonprofits and for-profits so that we have a better understanding of what that looks like. And I wish there'd been a better way for me to show this, But as we all know, we're busy people, and I didn't have time to problem solve this one better and come up with a better solution. And so if you look at the purple, that's kind of the factor that we're looking at. And then of course, red is what happens in a nonprofit. And then the green is what happens in a for-profit. And so the ownership in a nonprofit is none. Nobody owns it, right? It's just the public owns it. They're the ones that have the stakeholder investment in it, right? Versus a for-profit that has either an individual owner, a partnership, or stakeholders, right? Like their shareholders, whoever owns the company, there's someone who actually has an ownership of that. The primary mission in a nonprofit is to provide services needed by society. That's pretty broad in general, but any service needed by society, that's what nonprofit tries to do. The primary mission of a for-profit, as you might guess, is to make a profit for the shareholders, right? They're trying to make money. The secondary mission in a nonprofit is to ensure that there's a surplus, so your revenues are greater than your expenses at the end of the year, so the nonprofit can continue its mission, right? Because if we're in the red and we don't have any resources, can we do anything? No, we can't meet our mission, right? And so our secondary goal is to make sure we have more revenue than we have expenses so we can continue meeting the mission. In a for-profit, sometimes the secondary mission is to provide goods and services in a way that sustains the company, right? Because a for-profit business doesn't want to go out of business because then they're not making money, right? And so it's a little bit flipped on its side or on its head. So then on the right-hand side, we're still talking about those differences between nonprofit and for-profit. So when we talk about revenue sources, so where does income come from? You can see that for nonprofits, that's contributions, grants, membership dues, program revenue, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to talk a little bit more and dive a little bit deeper into revenue sources for nonprofits here in a little bit. And then in a for-profit world, the revenue is sales of products or services, investment income, like whatever they can do to make sure they're making money. But usually it's sales of products or services. Are we good? Am I moving too fast or am I just right? We're good. Okay. All right, good. And I appreciate that cameras are on because I really am looking at you guys to make sure, because if you're looking at me confused and shaking your head, no, we'll talk about it again. But if y'all are like on board, we're going to keep rocking. Okay, so in terms of workforce for nonprofits, some of you missed this one too, right? But the workforce in nonprofit is a mix of paid staff and volunteers. So sometimes people have a myth or think that nonprofit is solely volunteer led and nobody works there. You just volunteer at a nonprofit. And volunteers are key and critical. And depending upon the nonprofit, they may be more key or critical than others. But it's a mix of paid staff and volunteers versus a for-profit is just going to have paid employees. I mean, a for-profit isn't going to have volunteers helping with their work because they're not making a profit, like, right? Like if I have ownership in the company, I'll work for it and get reimbursed for that time. But for-profit's not going to have those volunteers. In terms of accountability for nonprofits, they're really just accountable to the public, right? Us, they're accountable to all of us. They have to file annual information returns with the federal and state governments to show what they've done. And we won't talk about those today, but if you've heard of 990s or 990Ns or things like that, that's how nonprofits actually report that data. And I know someone talked about like understanding if a nonprofit was good or not. If we have time today, we'll talk about it. But if not, I'm going to incorporate it into my next talk. So maybe that'll make you come back. And then for-profits accountability is solely to its shareholders, right? They have to file annual tax returns with the federal and state government, but their only accountability is to their shareholders. So if the shareholders are happy, great. If the shareholders are happy, not so great. And then tax status is the last thing. And I know somebody kind of mentioned that at one point in time, or maybe a couple times in the comments for the quizzes, right? So a nonprofit is exempt from income taxes if they're a 501c3. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. But has everyone heard the term 501c3? Yep. Okay. Some people maybe haven't. Yeah, we'll talk about terminology here in a minute. And then in a for-profit, the tax status is as a corporation, those owners are subject to income taxes. So those shareholders who get income at the end of the year then have to pay taxes on that income, right? Whereas a nonprofit doesn't have to pay taxes on the money that they receive. Clear as mud? It's a lot of information in one slide, but I think it was, for me, I thought a helpful way for you guys to just see that comparison because a lot of people are really, really familiar with the business world and how for-profits work. So to kind of have that comparison, is that helpful?
I think so.
Yes. Okay. So then we'll talk about what types of organizations are nonprofits. And I love this. I'm going to have to go back into that quiz and see if I can see who all answered, like what individual answers went. I just kind of had the collective graph of all those different types. So one of the questions was, which types of these are nonprofits? And I'm going to venture to guess that most of y'all got that wrong, because there was a couple of those where there were only 2 people who'd voted yes, that could be a nonprofit. The tricky part of that question was every single type of organization in that list on that quiz could be a nonprofit. Not saying they are, they don't have to be, but I'm saying they could be a nonprofit. It all depends on how they operate and what they do, right? At the end of the day, a coffee shop can be a nonprofit if none of their money goes to shareholders or stakeholders. If they have a charitable mission and their money is just reinvested in that mission, they're a nonprofit. Did that trick some people? Yeah, it did. And it was meant to, so don't feel bad, like I did that in a tricky way. But yeah, it is interesting because you can't tell if an organization is a nonprofit just by knowing what they do, right? So when we talk about a hospital, is it for-profit or nonprofit? Anybody know? A hospital, for-profit or nonprofit?
Both.
It
Either, right?
it depends.
It all depends on how they're structured and what they do. There are
Right.
private hospitals that have shareholders, and at the end of the year, they get money and they get their profit. And there's hospitals that are nonprofits. And at the end of the year, they reinvest their money into their mission, right? Yes, yeah, Kind House Ukraine Bakery is a nonprofit. But are all bakeries nonprofits? No. So there's bakeries that are for profits, right? Coffee shop is a good example of that, the bakery. So it was a tricky question, and it was meant to be tricky on purpose. But you don't know if it's for profit or nonprofit just based on what they do. That's the takeaway for today, or at least for this one. So the types of organizations that are nonprofits that live out there, it depends on which source you look at to kind of get a feel for it. But you can see just based on this right here, the bottom left-hand corner, that's pretty true, that human services makes up most of the nonprofits, or at least the greatest percentage of the nonprofits, but it's not even half, right? It's more like a third. And then we have arts and cultures make up about 1/10 of the nonprofits. Education makes up almost 1/5 of the nonprofits. There's environment and animals. There's health, international and foreign affairs, public and societal benefit, and religion related, right? We can't forget religion related can be nonprofit as well. I'll let that simmer for a second, because I know that, again, I tricked you, and a lot of you are processing that construct of, oh my gosh, like now I don't know if my coffee shop is for profit or nonprofit, and I don't know if the hospital I go to is for profit or nonprofit, and I don't know if the store I go to is nonprofit or for profit, right? So anyway, so I actually just, I guess Laura and Hannah and Sophia were probably the only 3 I saw there that are here today, but the Emerald Area Foundation just had a collaborative lab, and one of the information that was shared, pieces of information that was shared, I thought would be interesting to share today. So there's a lot on this slide, and I apologize again, I broke the rules of slideshows. But this is Texas nonprofits by focus area, which I thought would really help us, because earlier we were talking about United States. Now this is kind of talking about Texas and the breakdown there. And my purpose of sharing this isn't so you can see either the growth or shrinkage of each category, right? So this shows from 2015 to 2022, either growth or shrinkage of each kind of type of nonprofit in Texas. My point in showing this is you can see about 20,000 nonprofits in Texas are arts, culture, and humanities. About 25-ish more are education. About 5,000 are health, excluding hospitals. There's quite a few human services. Again, that tends to be the largest category. Then there's some philanthropic organizations, some religious organizations, which is pretty high in Texas, especially compared to other states across the United States. We have some other that just don't fit any category. And then you can barely see the little purple higher education line, because Texas doesn't have a ton of higher education institutions compared to the other categories. And then you can see that red line of hospitals there at the top. So we have a broad plethora of types of organizations that are nonprofits in Texas. And I didn't bring it down all the way to the Texas Panhandle, but I can do that. I used to have the number of nonprofits in the Texas Panhandle, but don't anymore. There was an answer on the quiz that I was going to share right here. What was the question? Number of nonprofits in Texas? Some of y'all got that wrong as well. So in Texas, we think there's about, there are about 97,000. So were you pretty spot on that?
Great. Jessica, we had a question in the chat real quick. Will you be sharing this PowerPoint or this information once you're done presenting?
Yeah, I'm happy to like PDF it and share it with AmeriCorps people, and you guys can share it if they want it. I'm okay with that. Yeah. Yeah, so 97,000 in Texas. Did y'all think there were more or less when you filled out the quiz? Anybody surprised by that number? No, pretty much spot on. Okay. All right, we'll keep rocking along if nobody has any questions about that. Okay, so this slide you can see has about 9 different categories of nonprofits. The IRS actually has these things called NTEE codes. Has anybody heard of NTE codes? Yes, no?
No.
I see about Laura, I think you're the only one that said yes, so yay. NTE codes, the one thing you wish you never had to know, but you're glad to be aware of. So basically the NTE codes are where the IRS kind of put this classification system and dividing the nonprofit organizations into major groups, basically to help you know, like, is it a hospital? Is it a zoo? Is it a Salvation Army? Is it a youth shelter? Is it a whatever? And so it helps you just clarify what that organization is. And so I kept it at the umbrella level. And so there are 10 categories, and you can see those right there. So there's major groups. So arts, cultures, and humanities, there's a category there. Education, you can see the third category, environment and animals. There's actually 2 subcategories that are under that make major groups, but are split out further on. Health, you can see there's a handful. Human services, there's quite a few under the human services, which probably makes sense because, again, the highest percentage of nonprofits are human services, and that's the most letters for groups that we have there. So a lot of nonprofits fit there. International foreign affairs. Then there's public societal benefit, and that's broken up into a little bit different direction. Religion related, mutual membership benefit, and then there's some that are unknown, which are really just unknown until they figure out what they are, and then they classify them. But if anyone is curious about the organization that they're serving at, and what they're classified as in terms of what the work is that they're supposed to be doing, you can look up your NTE code, which is a whole nother conversation that I can't go into today. And you can also go onto the IRS website and you can see all those subcategories for the NTE code. So you can see all the A's, all the B's, all the C's, all the D's. And it gets very, very complicated. It's very deep in that. But I think that is one way that a lot of organizations and people in the nonprofit sector classify things, because it's structured, right? It's already in place. Like, why am I going to come up with my own structure for what organizations do when the IRS has one that we can look at right there? So I would encourage you, whatever nonprofit you're serving at, figure out what your NTE code is and see what it classifies you as. A little bit of homework there. Okay, so here I want to talk a little bit more about vocabulary again, because
Jessica,
yes,
where do we find that?
yeah, you know what? Let me copy this. Ooh, let me copy this link right here, and I'll put it in the chat for you, Matt.
All right.
Because you find it at
My
this one.
determination shows it at 509A2. Is that?
That's not it. No, we're going to talk about that here in a second too. Actually, okay. Here's what we're going to do. Yeah, human services. So Victoria, that's great. You know that you're human services, but there's 7, 8 letters underneath that. Let me, and I think it's interesting to see what your NTE code is compared to what the IRS says you are, what you think you're supposed to be. Okay, I'm going to try and share a different screen real quick. And then after this, we'll probably take a quick break. So let's make it a few more minutes and then we can take a break. Is that okay, Laura?
Yeah, perfect.
I wasn't paying enough attention to time.
Okay.
Let's see. I don't want to stop sharing. I want to share something different. Oh, I'm going to have to stop sharing to share something different. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Can everyone see the IRS activity codes?
Yep.
So that is the link that I put in the chat. And of course, it's on the slideshow that we'll share later. But you can see here's A, Arts, Culture, and Humanities. Victoria, what organization are you with? Can she talk?
She's with We Find and Love.
Thank you.
And
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
so We Find in Love. Let's think about We Find in Love. That's the only one example I'll use. Otherwise, I could use more. But you're definitely not arts, culture, and humanities, I wouldn't think. Let's go down to B's, education. I know that you have some educational programs underneath your umbrella, but that's not
Yeah.
your main focus, right? So let's go down to C. Y'all can see how crazy this gets. It's definitely not environment, right? You're not trying to impact the environment, do some kind of beautification or anything like that. So we'll keep going. Animal related, definitely not animal related. I don't think anybody on this phone call would be animal related.
That next call we make.
There you go. Fair, fair. Healthcare, definitely not healthcare. That's not what you're providing. EF, mental health and crisis intervention. That has potential just because the programs that you're doing and what the purpose of them is in terms of creating connection and involvement. It's a little bit of art therapy, some of the stuff that you guys do.
Yeah, some of the programs are, especially with the Jordan chapter.
Yeah, yeah. So that has a chance, maybe.
Well, and there's an organization that does many things. Is the whole organization narrowed down to one, and that's like the primary?
Yes, so that's how the IRS classifies it, one. And so that's the next thing I was going to say is you may have different programs that fit different categories, but you're probably right, Victoria, because you have a broad variety of programs that you do. It probably all falls under that human services umbrella. That's my guess. Crime and legal related. Nobody here on this call is crime and legal related. Employment. Workforce solutions would be employment, but nobody's part of that. Although if you're doing job training, again,
I was about to say we do a lot of applications and job hunting for immigrants and refugees.
There you go. Now I'll tell you, here's my quick fix or my trick for this website, because as you can see, it goes on forever and we're not going to spend 10 more minutes on this website. But if you like, for example, work with immigrants, you can actually find where it might fit based on a keyword search. Does that make sense? I don't think it's immigrants' rights, but it could be, I bet the place is considered an ethnic and immigrant center because that's the purpose of it is to meet the needs of those immigrant group that's in a culturally appropriate way.
The place is just a building. It is not an organization.
Correct, exactly. So again, but you guys see how that works. I don't want to spend too much more time on this.
No, you're fine.
Go one by one and see what that looks like. But great questions. And again, I think some good information that you can find through that.
And you have a way to go and find out what ours is actually?
I do. I'll share it with you, Matt.
Cool, thanks. I mean, I set it up in 2017. I don't remember.
Yeah, I was going to say it would be all on how you set it up and what the IRS calls you.
Okay.
Hold on. I'm trying to stop my share. And then I'm going to share my screen again. There we go. Okay. No, we'll talk about that after the break. Shall we take a break, Laura?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's get rolling again. I know that break took a little bit longer than we were expecting. Okay. So next I want to move into a part where we just talk a little bit more about vocabulary, because earlier we talked about nonprofit and the different terms that people say to mean nonprofit. Has anyone heard the word tax exempt?
Yep.
Does anybody
Yes.
think that equals nonprofit?
No.
Good. Some are kind of contemplating it. So tax exempt doesn't equal nonprofit, and that is tricky as well, because a lot of people, so as a foundation, people will call me and say, hey, we're tax exempt. Can we apply for a grant? And the answer is, I don't know, because tax exempt doesn't tell me if you are a nonprofit. Like it's not the same thing. So we're going to talk a little bit here in a second. And I hope this answers at least one person's question about tax exempt question marks, right? And then has anyone heard the term public charity? No, maybe not.
No.
Okay. Public charity is an important term to know. And I guess I'm just going to say, hearing public charity, do you think that equals nonprofit? Do you think it's different than a nonprofit?
I'm assuming there's something different.
That's probably smart. That's wise, Matt. Thank you.
I probably missed that question.
Worded that weird way. And we already talked a little bit earlier about 501c3, and most everyone heard that term 501c3. Does everybody know what 501c3 means though? Well, at least one person, yeah, maybe two. Do you think it equals nonprofit? Maybe, maybe not. And of course, we have the term nonprofit. Laura, are you trying to cheat over there?
I don't know. I'm not certain of my answers, so I don't want to jump in. This do feel tricky.
It is tricky. And that, okay. And it feels tricky because it is tricky. And I'm also presenting it in a way that's not very clear. So let's talk about all these different words and see if we can define what they mean. Okay. Now the next slide is going to scare people. Please don't let it scare you. I will share with you what it means. I don't want you to know the details of it. There is no quiz later. Okay. Like I'm not going to ask you the questions about the details of what's about to happen. Okay. Everybody prepped and not going to freak out? Okay. Beautiful. Okay. So the reason this is kind of tricky and scary is because we have to talk IRS language a little bit, and nobody likes to talk IRS language. Or at least I guess some people do because they work for the IRS, but most people don't like to talk IRS language. And so if you'll see at the very top of this, I'm going to walk you through it all, don't worry. But at the very top, you see section 501C. Okay, there's no 3 after that. There's no number after that. It's just 501C. And then you can see that's tax exempt organizations. So when someone calls me and says, hey, we're a tax exempt organization, they've put themselves under this umbrella, right? And without even going down in the further in the umbrella, you can know that if you just tell me you're a tax exempt organization, I don't know what that means exactly, other than you're in this big umbrella. Does that make sense? So
Yep.
now you kind of know that if someone says, hey, we're a tax exempt organization, that means the IRS has said you don't have to pay taxes. Remember on that comparison between nonprofit and for-profit, there was the kind of the taxing thing, and it said nonprofits don't have to pay taxes, and for-profits have to, the individuals have to pay income tax on their earnings, right? Like that's the difference, right? So if you tell me tax exempt, you're just saying I'm in this umbrella. The IRS has said I don't have to pay taxes as an organization. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. All right, we're going to keep moving down. We're going to go to the far left-hand side where it says mutual benefit organizations, okay? So under that, again, there's no quiz. You don't have to understand these things or know these things well. I just want you to generally understand that there's 501c4s, okay? So now we've added a number. Those are civic leagues. Anybody heard of a Rotary Club or a Lions Club or a Kiwanis Club, right? Those are all civic organizations that are tax exempt. They are not 501c3s. Okay. So private foundations, 501c3s, right? So now all of a sudden 501c3, we see a thing that we are familiar with, right? Everybody said they've heard of 501c3s. Well, you can see that they're classified as a private foundation, and we're not going to go into private foundations today, but every single nonprofit organization is a private charity, a private foundation, unless they can prove to the IRS they're not. And again, I'm not going to go into IRS legalese or whatever, but I just want you to understand that just because you're a 501c3 doesn't also mean you are a public charity or a nonprofit. Okay. You can be a private foundation to be a 501c3. The IRS still considers you tax exempt. There's a lot more rules there. And anyone who wants to have coffee and talk about private foundations and 501c3s more, I'm happy to have that conversation, but we won't go into more depth. But let's go to the middle for a second. This is what most people think of when someone says the word 501c3. Accurate, public charity, right? Nonprofit, 501c3. Right in the middle, that's where most people think. And again, so Matt, I appreciate your little question. I wasn't going to dive that far down, but I will because Matt mentioned it. If you can see on the left-hand side in orange there, right, some traditional charities, the 509A1s, right? We have some nonprofit hospitals, public schools, churches, governments, community foundations, other publicly supported charities, aka nonprofits. Public supported charity also means nonprofit, right? And then right beside it in orange, we have publicly supported charities, 509A2. Matt, which one did you say you are? I think you're an A2, weren't you? Yeah, that's fair. Again, I'm not going to go into IRS legalese, but this all has to do with how you get your funding and what that looks like. We won't go into it today. But you can see it gets a little more complicated with some support organizations and things like that we're not going to talk about today. But in general, tax exempt just puts you in this umbrella that the IRS says you don't have to pay taxes, right? 501c3 puts you in this public charity realm. And even within that public charity realm, there's other things to determine if you're actually a public charity, aka nonprofit. That has to be clear as mud, right? But when you hear public charity, that is nonprofit in the traditional sense that most people use the word nonprofit. Anybody have any broad general questions about this specifically? Does this help You understand what tax exempt means just in the overall scheme a little bit? Yeah? Still a little confusing, but generally kind of understand? Yeah? Okay. So just know that people use those terms synonymously and they don't mean the same thing. That's really at the end of the day what it means. And now hopefully maybe you have a little bit better understanding of what those terms actually mean so you can use them correctly, right? Okay. Next slide. Okay, so when we talk about, okay, you see at the top, 501c3, right? So you kind of remember where we are in the middle of that chart, right? Charitable nonprofits by size. So again, we're looking at IRS guidelines for 501c3 charitable nonprofits. And you can see in orange, they've really made sure to explain excluding those private foundations. Because again, private foundations are also 501c3s, but they're not considered public charities. So they're not considered nonprofits. You'll get it eventually, I promise. But when we look at that by size, you can see in the big purple, and I apologize that this is blurry. You know, we're all busy people. We're trying to get stuff together. This is the best graphic I could find, and I did not have time to redo a chart. So later on, people will get clearer charts, but for now, this is what we got. So you can see in the purple that 55% of the nonprofits of public charities, which equals nonprofits, right? Of the public charities, 55% of them complete a 990N or have no expenses reported. And so that means that 55% of the nonprofits, according to the IRS, have annual gross receipts that are $50,000 or less, right? And some of them have zero income and zero expenses. And then you can see in the red, 20% of the nonprofits or public charities say up to 100,000 in annual gross receipts. So if you take the purple and the red, that's 75%-ish. I didn't do math, right? But it's right on there. 75%, 55 plus 20. I can do that math, I think, most days, right? So 75% of our nonprofits are operating under $100,000 or less every year, which might seem big to you, but is really quite small, right? That's not a lot of money, especially the under $50,000. A lot of organizations that I work with or are familiar with in the Panhandle, about 10 to 15,000 a year is their annual income and expense. That's really small nonprofit, right? And then you can see how that grows in terms of 8% operate with that $100,000 to $250,000 range. And then you can see those really, really big organizations, right? 1% operate with 5 to 10 million, and 2% have a greater than $10 million operating budget, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. So this answers the question that y'all asked, that I asked on the quiz, right? If most nonprofits are big and have a lot of resources, and I think most of y'all got it right, but some got it wrong. That no, actually, most nonprofits are really small and operate with a little bit of resources. Does that make sense? Yep. Okay, we're gonna keep rocking along. This is the next one. Again, it's a scary slide, but I'm gonna walk you through it. And I found it, Laura will remember seeing it last week at that Collaborative Lab at Area Foundation. And so if you just look along the bottom, what you'll see is the Texas, right? Not just United States, because the other one IRS was United States. This is Texas. And so it's kind of similar in the sense that a ton, 94,402 of all the nonprofits in Texas are considered grassroots. And so that's that really small organizations. And then you can see small, medium, large, powerhouse, economic engine. It just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So actually the least amount of nonprofits operate with a ton of resources. Most operate really small. And then you can see on the left-hand side that actually break down that grassroots nonprofits even smaller. And if you look at the bottom of that, you can see $50,000 or under per year, 77,465. So I would say at least half-ish of the nonprofits in Texas operate with $50,000 or less a year. Kind of provide some context to the size of nonprofits, I think.
More like 67%, like 2/3.
But see, Matt, you do math better than I do quickly. I didn't have time to do math. I have a calculator. Despite what my teacher said that I wouldn't have a calculator with me all the time, I do have a calculator with me all the time. I'm just not going to take the time to do the math right now.
I hear you.
But thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. Okay, so at the end of the day, when we talk about nonprofits, there's only one common thing about all the nonprofits. Anybody remember what it is? What's the only thing that makes them the same?
No profit sharing.
No profit sharing. Thank you, Matt. I see, because I think I saw a couple other people trying to say it, but they were still muted. But yeah, no profit sharing, right? They're reinvesting that profit back into their mission. And so has anybody ever heard of the double bottom line? No, no. One, maybe yes. Okay. Yeah. So nonprofits have a double bottom line, right? Their main mission is that social aspect, that mission-driven work. And in order to meet that, they have to be financially secure to be able to do it. They have to have those resources to make it happen, right? Without money, there's no mission, right? And then mission is the ultimate goal. So there's two things they have to balance. In the for-profit world, your number one goal is profit. That's all you're focused on. That's all your priorities are. In nonprofit world, there's two things you have to balance. Is that fair? So now if someone says double bottom line, you know what that means.
Can you say that one more time, Jessica?
Yeah, just that in a for-profit entity, your sole focus is profit. You're completely profit driven. Every decision, profit, profit, profit. And in a nonprofit, your sole focus is mission. But if you don't have resources to meet that mission, you're not going to get there. So you have a double bottom line. It's not just the financial bottom line you're looking at. It's that social bottom line. It's that mission driven bottom line. And you have to balance both those things, right? Because if you have a ton of money and not very much mission, you're probably misusing your funds, right? Like you're not correctly doing what you're supposed to do. And if you're trying to meet your mission and you don't have any resources, there's an imbalance there and you're never going to make it, right? So you have to balance that, both money and mission.
Okay, I got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Happy to clarify. Thanks for asking that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to nonprofit structure, okay? And again, there's only one commonality, so some of this is pretty general because it just has to be. So the core commitments of a nonprofit, they have their mission, they have their vision, and they have their values. That look familiar to anybody? Yeah, good. So the mission is, what do we do? Who do we serve? What are we trying to accomplish? And what impact do we want to achieve? The vision of a nonprofit is like, where are we going moving forward? What do we want to achieve in the future? Like, what kind of future society do we envision? And usually it's more narrow than just future society, but like for the people that we're serving, what do we want that to look like? Visions are typically really broad aspirations, right? They're kind of the touchy-feely. They're almost the why behind the mission of what, right? And then your values are, what do we stand for? What behaviors do we value over all else? How are we going to conduct our activities to achieve our mission and vision? And how do we treat members of our organization and our community, right? And as a nonprofit, a lot of times people look at our values to determine our worth, because they think our values should align with a nonprofit mentality, right? So when we talk specifically about mission, we talk about mission statement. So there's a handful of organizations on this call, and I know some of you are very brand new to your organizations, but do you know the mission statement for your organization yet? Yeah, I see 1 yes, 2 yes, 3 yes. A couple probably don't yet, and that's okay. But the mission statement is really important because it talks about why the organization exists. It talks about the core purpose of the organization. And so mission statements should really be short, direct, no jargon, clear. Somebody who said they knew their mission statement. Will you tell us your mission statement real quick?
Walking with families, working with churches, waking up the community to better care for the needs of kiddos in foster care.
Fantastic.
I like alliteration too.
I know, right? Me too.
Fun, yeah. But it's catchy, right? It's short, it's succinct, it's catchy. I will say this, when you really start talking about mission statements, you can critique mission statements to death and really go, we can improve this, we can make it better, and you probably can, but I think that's a good mission statement. You should be able to say your one sentence mission statement very quickly and succinctly. If someone goes, hey, what's your mission? And you start blabbing around and talking about what you do and how it works and the people that you look like and the people that you go serve and where your community looks, like you've lost people, right? Like your mission statement should be short. And so I made sure to include here, unfortunately, we don't have time to dive into all of this because some of this information, I took a semester-long class on nonprofits, right? Like there's a lot to cover and I don't want to go too deep, but I also want to give you enough that you can go dive deeper if you want to into some of these things, right? And so this is kind of the good and the bad mission statement, right? The good mission statement uses language your constituents use, is emotionally stirring, communicates the why. It's concise. It's a single powerful sentence, maybe two, maybe. Sounds good, spoken out loud, is memorable, maybe surprises people. It's actionable and it's specific. A bad mission statement, on the other hand, is going to use jargon your audience doesn't understand. It's logical, cold, maybe very factual based. It communicates maybe the what and how, but not the why. Maybe it's really long. It's a rambling paragraph, full of clauses, hard to say. It's forgettable. It's dull, can't be quantified, and is really vague. So on this next page, I talked about a little bit. So if you're crafting a mission statement for an organization, your mission statement should really say the mission is to what, for who, by how, right? It's almost like a fill in the blank. And if you can fill in those blanks, you've got your mission statement. The problem is when you start filling it in, a lot of us try to cram all the stuff that we do into the mission statement or all the hows, and it gets really complicated and convoluted. And that's not the purpose. You want to keep it simple. Our mission is to what, for who, and how are we going to do it? And so here's just a couple that I thought were pretty good examples of mission statements. If I'd had more time, I'd have picked some of the organizations that we have here today on the call, but the mission of the Women's Center is to significantly improve the mental health and well-being of all members in the community through counseling, education, support, and advocacy.
Jessica,
Almost a little too long. Yes.
there is a question that might tie into this very well.
Fantastic.
What if an organization does not have a mission statement due to limited scope or size, and should that be a priority for them to create?
I am going to say if your organization doesn't have a mission statement, there are some challenges and concerns that we're going to talk about here in just a second that I think will make that very clear. And yeah, I do think it should be a priority for the stakeholders and the board to come up with a mission statement, a concrete mission statement for what you do.
Mm-hmm.
That's the short version. If I don't answer that completely in the next few slides, bring it back around, okay? Great question. Another example. Read My Lips exists to transform our culture of sexual violence by educating, inspiring, and mobilizing a global community to read their lips, raise their voices, and create real change. Maybe a little bit vague, but catchy. You're going to remember it, right? And it has the who, the what, the how. The Eat, Learn, Play Foundation is committed to unlocking the potential of every child by fighting to end childhood hunger, ensuring students have access to quality education, and providing safe spaces for all children to play and be active. Right? They have 3 different missions within the mission, right? If you get any more than that, I feel like you've got to consolidate and do something like education, advocacy, creation, you know, something that's broader that encompasses more of your programs, because you cannot have in your mission statement all the bullet point programs that your organizations do, unless you only have one, and then you're fine. Is that fair? Okay. So next we're going to talk just a little bit about mission creep. Has anybody heard the term mission creep? I see maybe 2 yeses. Nobody else? Okay. So mission creep is when your organization expands its mission beyond the original goals that were set. And so I'm going to come up with kind of a crazy example, but that's what I do to really illustrate things a lot of times. I go extreme and I go big. But let's say, who else is on the call? Another Chance House. There's a good one. I'll pick on you guys. There's a couple of y'all here today. So let's say Another Chance House, who, for those of you who are unfamiliar, even though we've talked about it, they are a homeless shelter and they serve men who are in recovery. And so if Another Chance House went, you know what? You know what our community really needs? We need a museum. We need a museum. We're going to add a museum on this corner of our property, right? How many of you would go, that is not even close to what you do, right? Right? We house men in recovery and we're adding a museum. Like, those are 2 totally different things, right? So to kind of go back to that other question, if your organization doesn't have that mission statement, you're at risk for mission creep, where your organization is going to expand your mission beyond the original goals that were set, right? That's not in your wheelhouse. So stay where you're supposed to stay. I will say that mission creep is a lot more nuanced than that usually. And so it's a little harder to recognize or see that it's happening because a lot of people, especially who work in nonprofits, care about people, right? Like, that is that we are in this service sector for a reason, and we care. And so when we see a need, we want to meet that need, right? And a lot of times it doesn't align with what our mission is. Now, for some organizations, as they grow, their mission grows, right? But mission growing is different than mission creep, right? And going into a place where you're not supposed to be. And so the things that can cause mission creep include having an unclear mission statement. I would add not having a mission statement. My guess is whoever wrote that, because I haven't looked at it yet, probably knows what the mission is, but hasn't formally written it down and created a mission statement, right? So if you ask someone who's involved with whatever that's going on, they probably know what they're doing. They haven't formally sat down and said it. But like if community is an important thing. And so if I was trying to teach everyone to read, all the third graders, well, that's really impossible when you talk about the whole United States, right? But if I talk about it and I'm trying to affect reading rates for third graders in the Canyon, all of a sudden that's a much more manageable mission, right? So I think the mission helps you manage, having a mission statement helps you manage your work, right? And figure out what that looks like. And maybe you are United States wide, but maybe you're not. Maybe you're Texas wide, maybe you're not. And that mission helps you in both content and scope. Is that fair?
Yeah. I would add too, like in our context, most of you are at organizations where there is a board, there's established, guidelines where that mission's already set. It may become part of like kind of review I'm not saying it's off limits, like talk about it with your supervisor. If you see things like, hey, this feels like I don't understand what we're doing, it could be clearer. But if you're at an organization like Calvin's question, where it really can be a building out a support of the organization to create that mission statement, that's a great example of capacity building.
Yeah, absolutely. So other things that can cause mission creep that we will hopefully talk about a lot more next time we talk than today, but donor pressure and expectations, right? If every one of your organizations had a donor come today and go, we'll give you $1 million. That sounds fantastic and wonderful. And you can do so much with $1 million. But what if they go, but you have to, I don't know,
take in cats.
What is it?
Take in cats.
Taking cats, yeah. No matter what you do, who you are, you have to take in cats, right? So I'm going to give you $1 million, but you have to take in cats. Well, Discovery Center, you're not equipped to take in cats, right? But it's pretty appealing to get $1 million. So you start going, oh, if we could take in some cats, we get this $1 million. Here's what we can do, right? Like it's pretty easy to go with those donor expectations and go with that donor pressure to kind of help meet your mission. And a mission statement helps you go, look, Discovery Center, we're not cats, right? Like that sounds great, but we're really appreciative, but sorry, like we're not doing cats, right? Like we're not adopting cats and taking cats in. Board leadership and turnover can cause mission creep, right? A new excited board can sometimes push the organization in a different direction. A new leadership can do that. Overambitious program expansion, that's one also, it's great. And all of a sudden you're expanding to do all these things that you're really not set up to do. And you're not equipped or ready to do from a capacity standpoint. And then internal, external crises can sometimes push that. And so I think just being aware of mission creep and knowing like we're always going to come back to the center, ground zero, of our mission is really important. Okay. The nonprofit life cycle. Has anybody heard of the nonprofit life cycle? Hey, I'm telling you, you could do a whole day about the nonprofit life cycle. We don't have time. But what we are going to talk about is, I think when you talk about capacity building, which is where we're headed, right? We needed to get a foundation so that we could head in that direction and talk about capacity building. You have to understand that that nonprofits do have a life cycle. And so in general, somebody has a great idea, right? Oh my gosh, you know what? There's this need in the community. I have this idea on how to meet this need, right? And then that idea starts to take shape, right? So then they start something. And there's the startup phase where you're figuring out things and getting it all lined out, right? And then once you've done that, you may grow. Your organization may grow. And then you may hit maturity and go, yeah, we've got this figured out, right? Growth was kind of reiteration and learning and moving and doing new things. And maturity is like, yeah, we've got this. We're rocking along. A lot of the people that I saw today work in mature organizations, but there's some that are still in that startup or growth phase, right? Which is why that capacity building is really so important, because sometimes it's easier to see capacity building in that startup phase because you really have to get some stuff structured in order to move forward. And then once you've been mature for a while, maybe you start declining because leadership gets a little stagnant or stale, or the needs of the community change and you're not changing. And so then eventually you get to a point where you're terminal and your organization may go away, right? And once your organization's done, it has to close, right? So there's that nonprofit life cycle. If you'll see, as the decline starts happening, they've added this like turnaround phase, right? And so the only way for a nonprofit to continue to be a part of the community, even really to operate and continue to meet the mission, is to have that turnaround. And that turnaround takes so many different formats and looks different ways. But when we start talking about capacity, if you can identify where your organization is in the nonprofit life cycle, it's going to help you maybe know some of the things that may be capacity needed or needed for capacity building or structure, right? We're going to come back to this here in just a second before we close out here in just a minute. And I'm going to talk more about the details of each category to help you maybe identify where your organization is. Has anybody heard of founder syndrome? One, two, couple. So founder syndrome is a pretty common phenomenon in nonprofits, right? And so nonprofit founder syndrome is a phenomenon where the nonprofit organization becomes overly reliant on its founder. So this occurs when, one, the founder maintains a high level of control over the organization. Notice I didn't say involvement, I said control, very different. Two, the founder's unwilling or unable to delegate responsibilities. So it's limiting the growth of the nonprofit because the founder's keeping it close to their vest and right here. And then three, the founder's unable to adapt to new circumstances. It can lead to micromanagement, resistance to change, and a centralization of decision-making, which can limit the organization's ability to grow and innovate. So if we go back a slide to our nonprofit life cycle, if someone, a person, because someone has to have the idea, right? If someone has the idea and tries to get it started up, but the founder maintains that strict control and keeps it really close to their vest because they're really passionate about it and it's their baby, right? And they don't want it to be done wrong or incorrectly or et cetera, right? You'll never get to the growth phase. You're never going to move forward, right? And so it really stagnates the organization to stay in that startup phase. And so you can have organizations that have been around for 20 years that are still in that idea/startup phase because of the circumstances surrounding it. Does that make sense? So I just think it's important to know about founder syndrome and what that can mean and what that can look like. Which leads us to kind of hierarchy. So this was a little bit challenging for me to talk about because when you look at nonprofits, organizational hierarchy just says who's employed and where and how it works together, right? One challenging or different thing about a nonprofit's hierarchy is volunteers are often in this in different ways, right? In fact, your very top one is board of directors, which we're not going to get to talk about today. We will talk about next time. But your board of directors, your volunteers are at the top. Then that may be it. Or you may have an executive director. Or you may have 3 directors of different programs that report directly to the board. Or you may have one executive director, a CFO, a COO, a blah, 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 right? Like you can have a really long hierarchy as far as the organization and the human resources that work in it, or you can have kind of a wide one, or you can have a really small one, or you can have a really big one. And so nonprofits, organizational hierarchies vary based on the needs of the organization and what they're doing. Is that fair? I was trying to cover it, but that's all I can say about it, is it varies depending upon the organization and what they're doing and what it looks like. But I will say it is important to know your organization's hierarchy. So as a funder, when you submit a grant application to us, which is something we will not even talk about, but I require you to submit your organization's hierarchy so that I can understand what your organization looks like, right? And so if I'm requiring that hierarchy, you can imagine from an internal perspective, it's important that the people in the organization understand how it works. We're not going to talk about it today, but you hear about some nonprofits who are like working boards, right? Who are much more active and volunteers for the organization versus something that's a little bit maybe more mature in their life cycle of a nonprofit. And the board is just the volunteer and governance, and they don't get involved in any of the volunteer work kind of on the ground running, so to speak. But that's important for, again, me to understand, and I think it's important for you to understand. Okay, so here is one of that. Again, too much information on a slide. I broke the rules again. So yes, I'm happy to share some of these resources with everybody. And the link is on the slide, so you'll be able to go straight to the actual resource and not just trust my thing. But when you're looking at your organization and going, okay, where are we in terms of that nonprofit life cycle? I will also give you a little spoiler that if you're a specific program at a nonprofit, your program can actually also have a life cycle as well, right? So think about it in that terms. Like if you go, man, we're a huge organization and I have no idea where we are, but here's the program I am working with, you can do a program life cycle. But consider, and again, I'm not going to go through it all, but if you'll go down, let's do like impact. Let's just start there on that first one, right? So when it's an idea, that impact is really informal. It needs to be established. You're trying to integrate best practices and pilot launching it, right? Like trying something out versus starting up. That pilot was successful. So now you've learned some lessons and you're integrating it into your impact design and your measurement starts, right? You're starting to measure what the impact your program does. When you're in growth, it's established. You have a strong results, you have partners, you have consistent delivery. When you reach maturity, you have those consistent results, robust evaluation, continuous improvement, scaling it, maybe system building, etc. Maybe decline, the need exists, but the nonprofit isn't the partner of choice. Maybe you're duplicating something else that another nonprofit is doing, so your need is lower, right? And then when you're in crisis mode from a nonprofit lifecycle standpoint, your demand is near zero. There's an intense competition for the resources and energy. There's no need for your nonprofit, so that's why it's going to go away, right? That's just from the impact side. But if you look at each different category from your organization's standpoint and try to find out where we are in each one of those, it might help you identify where your organization is in the life cycle, which might help you shift or at least put some structure behind or around what capacity building efforts might be needed. That was really broad, that was really brief, but that is what it is. So that's where we're going to stop today, Laura, because the next one, we're going to talk about nonprofit funding sources next time, and then we're going to talk about boards, and then the third time, capacity building.
Capacity building. So y'all, thank you for the attention, because this lets us really, we want to build that foundation of understanding nonprofits so that we can think about how our capacity building activities build into the nonprofits so that you can continue just expanding that support you're offering at your site. Jessica, do you have a follow-on survey? And then we have one too.
Yeah, I was just going to look at it and see. I think, yeah, actually, I do have a follow-up. I have my last quiz I'd like y'all to fill out. So let me grab that link real quick and throw it in there. It's pretty short as well, but it is pertinent. It will help me not just know about today and what I could have done differently or better, but it'll help me for our next session.
Great. So y'all please fill that one out. And in a second, we're also going to have our quiz that's ours that we're kind of going to use to track attendance to make sure we're capturing your feedback for us as a program, and then also just kind of follow through with who's on the call.